headache, heartburn, indigestion, bad mood, body pain, constipation. It's not Pepto-Bismol, it's your posture. The top 6 most common bad postures, problems they may be causing, and how to fix them. It's coming up. So that was a long list in the intro, and those are just examples of what problems your posture may be causing you. The top 6 postures I'm going to be covering in this video are upper cross, lower cross, layered cross, pronation, distortion, flat back, and sway back posture. Now, those aren't all types of posture issues, but those are the most common, and they're all bad. Before we dive into them one by one, I do want to step into an explanation of what a normal back is, because it's a foundation in understanding posture. A normal back contains 4 curves. Starting at the neck, we have one that's supposed to go in towards the front of our body. Then we go down to our shoulders, and that's the convex curve, or the one that's going out away from our body. Moving on down, we see the lower back curve, or the lumbar curve in the spine. That one, just like the neck, is supposed to go in towards the front of your body. And last but not least, we have the tailbone curve, also known as the sacral curve. And that one, like the upper back curve, is supposed to be convex as well. So just bear in mind those 4 curves, because I'm probably going to be mentioning them throughout, considering they tie into posture. Starting with number 1, and arguably I'd say this is the most common posture issue, and this is called upper cross syndrome. Now, this is characterized by kyphosis, or hunchback posture, stooping forward, and sometimes even neck humps. That's basically fat deposits on top of the kyphotic curve. Usually people with this kyphosis or upper cross syndrome can be seen hunched forward, sometimes even with their head jutting forward. And that's usually because they're staring at something like a computer at a desk job or their phone. Now, I mentioned several things in the intro, such as indigestion and heartburn, and one I didn't mention, incontinence. These are all things that upper cross syndrome can lead to. Also, it can lead to bad mood and headaches as well. Now, why is this? First and foremost, the indigestion and the incontinence can be caused by the chronic leaning forward, hunched forward posture, because you're basically crushing your stomach and everything in your gut, including your bladder. That can lead to incontinence, but it also can lead to indigestion, especially if you're hunching forward while you're eating or after you're eating. Maybe you're watching TV and you're slouched over on the couch after eating. This can cause heartburn, and it can make it difficult for your food to digest properly. Now, I should say this now, don't take anything that I say as replacement for medical advice. The information I'm just providing for you has just come from research. Just a couple more issues that can be caused by this upper cross syndrome is actually lower oxygen levels. Because we're crushing our diaphragm, it's not able to expand. So we're paradoxically or chest breathing. And that actually decreases the amount of oxygen we can consume. Lower oxygen levels can, of course, also lead to bad mood, but so can pinching of nerves in your cervical spine. That can, of course, be caused by however you're holding your neck. Headaches can, of course, also be caused by nerves being pinched in your spine, a result of the bowling ball of your head being pushed forward too far. So obviously, this upper cross syndrome is a major issue in our society, based off of the jobs that people have, typically seated desk jobs, and also our lounging activities that we have. So how do you fix it then? Well, simply put, you basically have to strengthen the right muscles and stretch the right muscles. When you're hunched forward, your chest is chronically tight, and so are some muscles in your neck as well. I won't get into the specific neck muscles that are too tight, but also our upper trapezius is a little too tight. Stretching those can significantly help. Muscles to strengthen include the middle and the lower back. Our back muscles and our core stabilizers are meant as long-term endurance muscles throughout the day. In other words, they're supposed to keep us upright. And when we're not really being upright throughout the day and we're not doing things like walking around like we usually do, and if we're living an active life, then we're not exercising those posture muscles that are meant for endurance. That's why it's really important to include a middle lower back exercise that includes strength endurance training. Moving on to number 2, lower cross syndrome. This one's super common because it's also caused by sitting for prolonged periods of time, and it causes excessive hip flexion. In other words, your knees crumpling forward towards your body when you're in the seated position. These excessively tight hip flexors can cause our pelvis to rotate anteriorly, or in other words, tilt forward. This increases the amount of curve that we have in our lower back, which is not a good thing because it puts more stress on our lower back. That being said, really common issue that you might notice is that you have lower back pain that sometimes will come with lower cross syndrome. Also, hip pain because those hip flexors are chronically tight. So what do I do to help this lower cross syndrome? Well, strengthen the right muscles and stretch the right muscles. So in other words, you're going to definitely want to stretch your lower back, you want to stretch your hip flexors, and you're going to want to strengthen your local core stabilizers, which are your core muscles, your deep core muscles. I'm not just talking about the abdominals. Actually, in this one, the abdominals are important to strengthen as well. But the local core stabilizers are going to be key for most of these posture issues. Moving on to number 3, and this one is also super common, and I'm going to spend the least amount of time on it. Why is that? Because it's a combination of number 1 and number 2. Upper cross syndrome plus lower cross syndrome equals layered cross syndrome. They got really creative with the name there. So as you can expect with upper cross and lower cross, you're going to see a hunchback person with a lower body that has an anterior pelvic tilt. And as you can expect for the poor people that have the most issues, there's nothing you can do for it. I'm just kidding. Basically, to correct the upper cross and lower cross syndrome combined into the wonderfully named layer cross syndrome, all you have to do is fix upper cross syndrome and fix lower cross syndrome. Same rules apply. Stretch it and strengthen the right muscle groups. Moving on to pronation distortion syndrome, also called pes planus distortion syndrome, which this one is the most ridiculously long name, and it's really common, and I just call it knock-kneed with turned out and flat feet. It looks like this. For these individuals, they also may end up with internal hip rotation. Now, all of these posture issues I mentioned, for example, upper cross syndrome, it follows all the way down the body. And usually it starts from the feet and it goes up. So it's not just localized for the most part into one area. If you got something wrong with your feet, it's gonna run all the way up what's called the kinetic chain. That's the case with this distortion syndrome, or the pronation distortion syndrome. These flat feet are usually caused by really weak intrinsic foot muscles. And by having weak feet, then you have no arches. And by having no arches, your tibia rotates inwards and pulls your knees in. And when your knees cave in, then it twists your femur, which is your thigh bone, and can cause an internal rotation on your hip. From there, it's going to cause some type of feeling or pain throughout the rest of your body as well. A lot of people with pes planus distortion syndrome or the pronation distortion syndrome, they're going to feel issues in their feet. They're going to have ankle problems. Sometimes they might end up with Achilles tendonitis. Some people might end up with plantar fasciitis. And again, this is not medical advice. This is just general research. They may also complain of knee problems, possibly even cysts in the knee, and then even hip pain as well. One more really important point for this, especially if you are an athlete or looking to become an athlete, or just a person that doesn't want to get injured because nobody wants to get injured. This type of syndrome or this posture needs to be corrected because it can lead to an increased risk of knee ligament injuries such as ACL tears. The amount of torque that your tibia pushes on your knees, of the rotation, can break, pop, or tear the ligaments in the knee, especially the ACL. So really important to make sure that you fix this. So enough doom and gloom. How do I fix it? What do I do for this one? So simply put, strengthen and stretch the right muscle groups. For this syndrome or this posture syndrome, you are going to want to stretch the gastrocnemius, which is the main muscle of the calf. You're also going to want to make sure that you stretch your adductor complex, which is your inner thigh as well. And the last one to stretch are your hip flexors. For strengthening, I would recommend starting with the feet, the intrinsic muscles of the feet. You want to work on getting that arch back up to par, and you want to strengthen your gluteal muscles too. Gluteal muscles will help with external hip rotation, so that will help you in the long run as well. And there's research that shows that gluteal exercises combined with making sure you strengthen your arch can compound the effects of fixing that posture. Moving on to number 5. This one is commonly referred to as flat back posture, also known as posterior pelvic tilt. Now, posterior pelvic tilt or flat back posture is basically the exact opposite of lower cross syndrome or anterior pelvic tilt. Instead of you having your pelvis tilt forward, your pelvis is going to rotate backwards. It's going to make you look more like, or feel more like, you have a C shape to your back. It won't necessarily look like that. It's going to look flat, and you're going to look like you have a butt wink or a tail tuck. A lot of people complain of the sensation of falling forward when they have this posture issue. And of course, chronic lower back pain. So what exactly causes this syndrome? Guess what? Sitting. Usually all these posture issues are caused by sitting one way or another. Now, how can one type of sitting cause lower cross syndrome, that is a tilted forward pelvis, and one type of sitting causes posterior pelvic tilt, which is butt wink or a tail tuck? Well, depending on how you sit. Some people sit forward at their computers and they lean really far in and they cramp up their hip flexors. Some people lounge back and they create that arc or that curve in their spine backwards. Couch potatoes. Okay, so I have flat back or posterior tilt syndrome. What do I do about it? Well, this one means that your butt is probably really tight and so is your abdominals. I'm not talking about your local core stabilizers. I'm talking about the muscles that people typically try to work on, the abs. Those ones are going to be super tight because you're constantly hunched forward. So you're going to stretch yourself in the opposite direction, and you're going to stretch your butt as well. For strengthening though, you're going to want to work on the local core stabilizers, especially the intrinsic and deep muscles of the spine that are going to help you stay in that upright posture. Those are just a few examples of the exercises that you can do. It's not a conducive list. All right, last but not least, number 6, sway back posture. This one, in my opinion, is my favorite. I don't know why it's my favorite. I guess this one's my favorite because it's so complicated. That's why. It's a lot going on with sway back posture. And it's really commonly mistaken for lower cross syndrome, which is another reason why I find it's challenging. So the cool thing about sway back posture is that it looks like, as I said, lower cross syndrome, but it actually is posterior pelvic tilt syndrome. So it's in disguise. And people think that it's lower cross syndrome because sometimes they'll look at the person and they say, hey, it looks like they have a big lower back curve, like it's going really far in. But that's because the person is leaning really far back. These type of people that have sway back posture, oftentimes they will lean with their hips forward and they'll lean back when they're talking and oftentimes put one hand on their hip and lean back. And they're putting a lot of pressure on their lower back. And in fact, that's one of their complaints is going to be lower back pain, because forcing their hips forward past the line of their shoulders is going to basically punch into the lower back and put a lot of pressure on it. Because now that bowling ball of a head along with all the shoulders is way back, is pushed backwards off of the midline. Your center of gravity is completely changed, and that's why all the pressure is put on that lower back for sway back posture. Another common thing that comes with the sway back posture is slight kyphosis, or slight rounding forward of the shoulders. And last but not least, sometimes people have hyperextended knees with sway back posture. So they've just got a lot going on, but they can definitely fix it with the right stretches and the right strengthening exercises. And also being mindful. And that's the key for all of these postures. So how do I fix sway back posture? Well, you'll focus on strengthening your hip flexors and definitely your local core stabilizers. But for this one, you're also going to want to strengthen the quadratus lumborum, which is a muscle of your back. For stretches, I do recommend stretching your glutes and your hamstrings as well for this one. So there you have it, the top 6 most common bad postures. The main takeaways from this episode is that how you sit and the activities of your daily life can lead to your bad posture and can lead to muscle imbalances, meaning muscles that are super tight and muscles that are super weak. One thing to keep in common is, while you may be thinking that some gym activities that you're doing are helping you, you might actually be making your posture worse because you're strengthening the wrong muscles. If you think that might be the case for you, check out this video on the top 5 worst leg machines you might be using at the gym. Or if you're new to exercising or you're just getting started, here's a great beginner's guide to the squat. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Go ahead and like and subscribe and comment below. Do you have any requests, any questions? I'd love to hear. See you in the next one.